The Battersea Power Station architects, Wilkinson Eyre, the London-based practice Chris Wilkinson and Jim Eyre have run for 30 years, designed the Millennium Bridge at Gateshead, which won the Stirling Prize in 2002, the gas holders at King's Cross, the Western Library in Oxford, and a whole range of projects around the world, from high-rises in China, among them some of the tallest buildings in the world, to the cooled conservatories at the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. As a practice, they're hard to pin down. Jim Eyre says they look at every commission with a fresh eye. He knew from early on that he might be an architect, so his mother bought him a subscription to Architectural Review.
I would have been 14 or 15, something like that, and I was always very keen on art, and I love painting and drawing and so on. I don't seem to do very much these days, but I always had a sort of reasonably good sort of scientific or mathematical brain. Nothing very clever, nothing special, but I did sort of think, I always thought about, well, how are things made, as well as the aesthetic, if you like. And architecture seemed quite a sort of logical and natural thing to move into. And I couldn't really think of anything else I wanted to do, particularly. So it wasn't like I had this amazing passion to be an architect, but I just thought this is the right thing for me to do. And I kind of never looked back from that.
Jim became a disciple of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, the German-American modernist behind buildings like this, the Farnsworth House in Chicago, constructed just after the Second World War. It's a good illustration of one of Mies' famous quotes, "Less is more." Mies also said, "God is in the detail." Those ideals have guided Jim Eyre's drawings down the years, and he argues today that an ingenious concept, like the one for Battersea Power Station, is not enough on its own. It will stand or fall on the quality of detailing, which is where computer art comes in.
Well, I've always felt that, in the difference between a good building and a bad building is often it can just be in the details, because you can have the most amazing concept, might look good in the photographs if they're not taken too close, but it's that sort of closer examination of a building that makes it more timeless, that makes it last longer. The real feel of quality, I think, comes out in the level of thought that's gone into the details. And if you lose that, I feel that you lose a lot from a building. Ideally, as an architect, you want to have absolute control of every aspect of design. But I think, on a project of this scale, the economics of it are kind of important. We're talking about large numbers. And I think the thing to do is always to work out, well, where is the right place to spend the money, first of all? And generally speaking, it's on things that you come in touch with and see, and the fabric of the building and what keeps the weather out. Those things have to be done well, and not to agonize over things that nobody sees, just not experienced. And in a way, I think, as an architect, you therefore pick your fights quite carefully on what's really important, and just focus on making those things happen. But part of it also is not going off on flights of fancy too much, and make sure that what you're designing is needed, and then concentrate on detailing it in a sensible, elegant way and functional way.
Detail-obsessed Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, too. In the 1930s, his homage to industry, ingenuity and progress included bronze doors, wrought iron staircases, and a spectacular control room in the Art Deco style. This space survives, although it's under wraps during the building work. But the polished tiled walls in the turbine hall are there for all to see, a sort of Greek temple devoted to energy. Art had its place in 1930s architecture. Details like these are part of the listed building, and Historic England have insisted they're restored rather than replaced.
There was sadly a sort of a belief by some that listing a building means it has to be preserved in aspect and that nothing can happen to it. And certainly our position is very different from that. I mean, each building on its own merits. In the case of Battersea Power Station, this is a building that was decommissioned in 1983. Along came a succession of abortive development proposals, including one very well-publicised proposal to turn the building into a theme park. And what happened at that point was the roof was taken off the boiler house, and that can be a death sentence for historic buildings, and its condition deteriorated rapidly. In this case, we're pragmatists, and we understand that there needs to be a certain amount of development because, let's be honest, there is quite a lot of development happening around Battersea Power Station that will impact on some views, but the conservation work alone is substantial. It's literally hundreds of millions of pounds just to get the building in a good state of repair. If we think about, for example, the new views that the public will get of the power station, my feeling is that although there's a lot of new development happening around about the power station, its prime setting is very much related to the Thames, and the new public realm that will be created between the Thames and the power station it's a massive space, and those iconic views of the power station are really from its river frontage and across river, so those will be preserved.
Historic England also put strict conditions on Battersea's 4 chimneys. Originally, there were only 2. The others were added when the power station was extended in the 1950s. The new owners were told they could be taken down, but must be replaced like for like. It was a controversial decision.
The way that they were constructed was a completely bespoke method that no chimney contractor would ever dream of doing now. The chimneys were originally fabricated in sections of about 1.2 metres, and these sections, sort of circular sections, were all stacked up on top of each other, but crucially the concrete was cast in situ. I was involved in the site inspections. I went out and had a look at the chimneys as they were being taken down and rebuilt. And when the first one was rebuilt to a height of 25 metres, that gave us the reassurance that they could all be taken down. The other 3 were taken down then and built back up. And it's gone from something that was very controversial at the time to something now we can really celebrate.
In the restoration of Battersea Power Station, there are 1,000 challenges. How, for instance, do you match new bricks with old in a structure that was built 80 years ago?
The very first question that we asked ourselves when we started to work at Battersea is, what is our repair philosophy? What are we trying to achieve here? What's the building going to look like when we've finished it? And what we were struck by actually was previous repair regimes that had happened, that the brick match was not perhaps quite what it should be. I mean, Battersea is a huge building, but it's a piece of sort of 30s streamlined design. It's remarkably susceptible to patch repair, which starts to upset its clean lines and its sort of streamlined design. You know, it works very much as an interplay of sort of light and shadow and modelling on the facades to break down its vast bulk, as opposed to applied ornament that you might find in perhaps buildings of earlier periods. So if you put in a repair that perhaps isn't blended in quite as well as it might, it really does stand out. So really from the off we were trying to blend the repairs in as seamlessly as we possibly could.
Surveyor David Hills wasn't sure if the firm that made the bricks in the 1930s was still in business.
I had to get brick samples sent in from various manufacturers, and I used to push them across the building in a wheelbarrow and hold them up against the building. No, that doesn't work. This doesn't work. And it went on for months, and we weren't really getting anywhere particularly at all. And it all came from a contemporary article from 1935, which said it's clad externally in Blockley bricks. We found a company around there that was quite prominent in brick making, and thought, well, we could be onto something here. So I phoned up the works and excitedly speaking to the receptionist. Really exciting. We think you might have made the original bricks for Battersea Power Station. We're regenerating the building. We'd really like to speak to you. And I got a sort of deadpan response who said, well, everybody's in a meeting right now. I can take your number and I'll get back to you a bit later on. And he said, what was it called? Battersea Power Station. And she'd really not heard of it at all. And I was like, can you spell that? B-A-T, and she's repeating B-A-T-T. And as she was saying that, I heard somebody walk past behind me and say, oh, we supplied the original brickwork for that. And I was like, who's that person? Let me speak to that person there. And then it started to materialise, and it turned out that the works manager had a photograph, an original photograph from 1935, showing the power station, talking about the bricks that they used in order to make it. And that really, then he said, right, well, I'll come up tomorrow with a boot full of bricks. And he did, and the rest is history, modern history.
We really like the challenge, actually, of working with an existing building. There's something I really love about this combination of the new and the old together. And the new can contrast with the old, but it doesn't necessarily have to. So a lot of what we do that's new is quite sort of fine and light, but still has a sort of vaguely industrial feel to it. And sometimes we look at some part of it that's old, and we think, well, actually, we do need to restore that bit. And sometimes we say, well, actually, look at that bit in its sort of degraded or state. Let's just keep that because it looks amazing. You know, it might just be paint that's sort of, or graffiti or something that's there that's interesting. And you get this extraordinary contrast between the historic fabric and then the new, one against the other, which I think is sort of really exciting. I've always had this thought that when you're working with a listed building and you're changing its use or adapting it to something, you should work with the building, with the architecture. Now, that's not the same as continuing exactly the same architecture, or sort of pastiche, if you like, or whatever you want to call it. It's more about respecting it. So it's not sort of, well, I can make some amazing intervention that's all about me. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create I'd say, yes, there are interventions, but it's something that when you walk into Battersea Power Station, we want you to know that you're always in Battersea Power Station. And I've always felt that in order to do that, you need spaces that are major scale, huge scale, and you always want to be able to see significant elements of the historic fabric.
This is the cathedral of the 20th century. I think the challenge and the interesting part of this project is the fact that here we are touching the industrial heritage, and we had a fantastic relationship with Historic England on the project for one and probably simple reason, which is they are very nervous about all those amazing industrial heritage that we have in this country and in many other countries, but which are very difficult to stack up financially, to repair them, to restore them. So if we can prove that we make a success out of that project, I think it's great for the future of those buildings, because they are what we are dealing with now in the 20th century and 21st century.
Having sourced the bricks to match those used on Battersea Power Station 90 years before, made new chimneys just as they did in the 1930s, and agreed what would go inside, all that was left to do was to get on and build it. It soon emerged that the renovation of Battersea Power Station would become one of the most ambitious building projects in London, if not